Hello everyone. Today is World Suicide Prevention Day. And for over 10 years now, NALAG has marked this day by generating and facilitating community discussion around suicide prevention and bereavement support services by hosting our annual Walk Towards Hope event. As we all know, New South Wales communities have been hit hard in recent months by COVID-19. So instead of our traditional community walk, the NALAG team are pledging to dedicate a special COVID-safe walk to someone they know who has died by or been bereaved by suicide. We encourage you to join us in spirit. Walk the dog in the morning and the afternoon, they'll love you for it. Walk the kids around the block and perhaps share a memory with them of someone you might have lost. Walk up and down the steps in your house or on the veranda a few extra times. Walk around the garden and really take in the butterflies and the birds and the flowers. Walk down the street as you make that phone call to someone who might be doing it a bit tough at the moment. However or wherever you walk, do it with purpose and really consider who you're walking for. One of the integral parts of World Suicide Prevention Day is generating community discussions around suicide prevention and bereavement support services. Today, we speak to Mandi Smart, Coordinator at Standby. Standby is an Australian government initiative established in 2002 to meet the need for a coordinated community response to suicide. Standby is a postvention program dedicated to assisting people and communities who have been impacted by suicide.
Hi, Mandi. Just wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the organisation that you work for.
Yeah, thanks, Brenda. So my name's Mandi and I'm the coordinator for Western and Far Western primary health networks for Standby Support After Suicide.
Mandi, can you tell us more about Standby and what this program entails?
Sure. So Standby is a suicide postvention service. It's offered Australian-wide and it's delivered through Social Futures here in our area that we're speaking from, Western and Far Western New South Wales. The Standby program is funded by the Australian government. And what we do is we support anyone who's been bereaved or impacted by suicide. Standby provides local coordinated support to individuals, small groups, large groups and communities. There's no restrictions on the time since a suicide occurred or the relationship the person seeking support had with the deceased. People we support includes family, friends, neighbours, first responders, schoolmates, teammates, workmates, service providers. It's anyone who has been impacted. So through the Standby program, we provide an initial support session, which is either face-to-face or over the phone, providing psychological first aid through a 6-step crisis intervention model. During this support session, we assist the individual to establish what their immediate needs are, and we look at what supports they have available to them. We then look at what supports are available to meet any unsupported needs and refer the individual to these services. During these support sessions, we provide information, encourage and promote adaptive coping, and provide emotional comfort. Then we stay in contact with the people we support for 24 months after that initial contact. Standby also works collaboratively with other service providers and community groups to support communities after a suicide occurs. We're able to assist communities to establish protocols and processes so that in the event of a suicide, each service knows their role and duplication of services is avoided. Standby is free, it's 24/7 and it's confidential. Standby can be contacted on 1300 727 247. That's the 24-hour phone number. Coordinators can be contacted directly to their mobile numbers, via email, or even face-to-face. We have no referral forms. We try to make it as easy for everybody to access the service as possible. So people can refer themselves or anyone can refer someone, but we always make sure that we've got permission and consent from the person being supported to contact them. And Standby works within community development as well. So we offer professional workplace training and we deliver a number of workshops that are tailored to the needs of the participants. And we deliver those to other service providers, workplaces, schools, communities, first responders. Essentially, there's education or a workshop that is available and able to be tailored to anyone's needs.
What are some of the myths and, I guess, misconceptions around suicide? And what have you learned, or what do you know about that?
So I think there's definitely a lot of myths around suicide. So I might go through some of the most common ones that we hear. A lot of people assume that it's only people who have a mental illness who will suicide. But we know that many people who die by suicide do not have a mental health diagnosis and have not had contact with the mental health system. And it's just the same that somebody who has a mental health diagnosis does not necessarily mean that that person will suicide or has suicidal ideology. People also think that often there's only one cause or one event that has led to a person taking their own life. But we know that suicide is rarely caused by one factor. Suicide's a very complex combination of things that have happened within a person's life. And it's really important that we don't oversimplify it as well by trying to narrow it down to one cause, because we definitely know that it's a response to an accumulation of issues over time. Another myth that we hear is that people assume that the person who has died by suicide wanted to take their own life. They wanted to die. So studies of people who have had a non-fatal suicide attempt have shown that many of these people didn't actually want to die. They just couldn't live the life that they had any longer, and they just saw no other option. The option was to either live or to not live. And their suffering was so great that they just couldn't, they just had to escape from that pain that they were in. But yeah, the actual goal of dying, wasn't actually the goal of many of those people. There's also the misconception within society that if you talk about suicide, you're giving somebody the idea to then follow through with suicide, or to suicide. But we know that if somebody's not thinking about suicide, you're not going to give them the idea by speaking to them. And what we actually know is that if you directly ask somebody what their thoughts of suicide are, if you have concerns, you're actually giving them permission to talk to you about how they're feeling. And this conversation, you may actually just be saving a life by starting that conversation. And there's many more, people sometimes think that people who are actually talking about suicide and, and saying things like, I'm going to take my life, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to end it, they don't actually go through with it. But it's always really important to remember to take somebody seriously if they're, saying these things or you have any worries, because, we never want to miss anything. So it's always really important to take them seriously. And then moving forward, there's a thought that people who suicide are selfish, but we know also that many people who do attempt suicide feel that they're a burden and that those around them are better off without them. So that person may have such a feeling of hopelessness and be in so much despair that they're just unable to imagine that things will get better. So in a way, they're trying to, they're doing it for other people's benefit. And I think maybe the other thought that maybe goes back a little bit to that, only people with a diagnosed mental illness will suicide, is that a lot of people think that suicidal ideology only affects certain sorts of people. But what we know is that suicide, anybody is vulnerable to suicide.
Thanks, Mandi. And inside the family unit, and obviously close family and friends are very impacted by when someone takes their life by suicide. Who else is impacted by that?
Yeah, it's really far and wide reaching, and it's important that when we support people who have been impacted by suicide, that we do consider everybody who could have been impacted. And these people include witnesses, and that could be the person who found the deceased. But unfortunately, sometimes people also witness the actual act itself. First responders, service providers who were working with the deceased. So, sometimes if the person was having mental health issues, there might be a therapist or a carer involved who was working with that person, and it can affect them quite severely if that person goes on to suicide. But you've also got, GPs and people like that that have a relationship with the person, schoolmates and the whole school community, workmates and workplaces, teammates. And it can even affect entire sporting competitions, if a person within a team takes their own life. Neighbours, acquaintances, community groups, spiritual communities, and it can affect whole communities, especially in smaller towns and rural areas. The whole community may have known the person who took their life. So it can have, far-reaching consequences throughout the community. And there's also, then we consider perhaps when a celebrity takes their life, fans of celebrities can also be impacted by suicide.
Yeah. So why is it so important to support people after suicide?
Yeah. So research has shown us that individuals who have been bereaved or impacted by suicide are at greater risk of suiciding themselves. So this research shows us that individuals are 8 times more likely than the general public to take their own lives once they've been impacted by a suicide. We also know that an average of 135 people are exposed to each suicide death, and that 10 or more people are significantly affected by each suicide. And this, of course, can be much higher in many cases. The support's important too because suicide is different from other forms of sudden death, and that can be due to the intentional nature of the death, the method of death, the rejection, responsibility, the guilt and blame, and the stigma that those left behind might feel. The effects of the trauma of losing a loved one to suicide or finding someone deceased from suicide, the possible changes to normal mourning rituals such as funerals or burial rites, and the coronial investigation that must occur after each suicide or suspected suicide takes place, all place a greater burden on the bereaved. So it's the goal of postvention to ease the trauma and its related effects on the bereaved, and to encourage their resilience and coping strategies. So post-suicide support is vital to minimise the risk of suicidal ideation and suicidality, and postvention support also helps prevent the onset of adverse and complicated grief. Standby support after suicide works in this vital postvention space to support individuals, groups and communities to engage and remain engaged with local supports within their communities to address their needs following a suicide. Standby remains in contact with the individuals for 24 months to ensure they remain engaged with their supports and to re-engage them as necessary, and provide referral and engagement to other services as that individual's needs change over time.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mandy. I think as NALAG, we do support people one-on-one, and it has been a really vital part of that postvention grief and loss space. But it's really good to have another organisation like yourself that are part of that, I guess, widening that team and you being able to walk with families and communities. I think this is something, it's going to be a great partnership for us and yourselves to be working together. So thank you so much today, Mandy, for talking to us about this really difficult topic. And I'm really grateful that we do have one day in a year that we do shine a light on this topic. And it just opens up those conversations. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Brenda. And I'd also probably just finish up with saying that if anything we've spoken about today triggers anything for anyone, that they can definitely give Standby a call on 1300 727 247 or make use of Lifeline 131114.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you, Mandy, for your time and for your work in suicide prevention and bereavement support. You can find out more about Standby and access their online resources by heading to their website at standbysupport.com.au. Joan Talbot lost her son Shannon to suicide 13 years ago and has been part of every Walk Towards Hope event since. NALAG's Deputy President, Jen Cowley, spoke to Joan last year for our 2020 Walk Towards Hope, and we want to share with you her story and her grief journey once again.
How important is it to you that you mark Shannon's death that way and you remember Shannon? How important is that Walk Towards Hope for you each year?
I think it's very important because over the years it's grown and you meet people that you've seen for, the 12 years or whatever. You see the new people coming and you have your little chats and things like that, which I find is really, really good, It's nice to see. It's nice to see that people can come out and mark the day, which is, I think, is important.
So that ritual of remembering is important.
People can start to open up about it that haven't. In the beginning, people would not say anything, but now people are talking about what has happened, and so I think that's good. I think it's good communication with people.
People find it hard enough to talk to somebody who has suffered some sort of loss or bereavement.
Yeah.
But they find it particularly hard to speak to people who are bereaved through suicide. What are the sorts of things that you found helpful, and also importantly, what are the sorts of things that you found unhelpful?
The things that hurt is knowing that you have friends that used to come to your house or you would go and have a coffee with that just seem to shy away from you. Whether they're too frightened to say anything or what, I don't know. But I actually asked a couple of my friends why things had changed. Was it because of Shannon? And it really was no answer to it. So that was just dropped, because they didn't want to face it. It wasn't that I couldn't face it, it was that they didn't want to. So
that can be very isolating, can't it?
It is, very isolating. And it's sad that people, this day and age, that people can't sit and talk about suicide, but a lot of people can't even talk about death. But, when you look at suicide, it's a hard thing to accept, but you have to accept it sooner or later, and otherwise it will bring you down. It will destroy you.
So, what would you say to people who are who have friends who are bereaved through suicide or family? What would you say to them in terms of how they might be able to help those who are bereaved through suicide?
Is to take the time to talk, take the time to show people that they care, and to talk about it, because I think by talking you're letting go of a lot of your feelings, and somebody's there listening to you, and that's a big thing, is for somebody to listen to you, even if they don't say a word and you just babble on. It's just, you do need to talk.
Could you talk to me a little bit about what you were saying earlier about that sense, the constant why and the questions, and how that feels and how you deal with that?
It's a dreadful feeling. You're always wondering why did this happen? And you sort of, and if you keep going that way, if you don't give up, it will eat you away. You have to come to terms with yourself that this has got to stop, because you're not going to get that answer. You're not going to get the answer. I tried. I pieced things together. I was bitter towards people, and it took me 5 years to get over that, because I knew I had to, because I couldn't go on just blaming everybody else for that.
Have you been able to forgive Shannon?
Yes. It took a long time. Yes, it took a long time, but yes, I do forgive him. But every day I wonder what he looks like and things like that, you know, things that it would have been lovely to see him grow up and have his children and things like that, but it didn't go that way, so you just have to accept it.
Finally, what would be your advice to people who perhaps are struggling with their loss?
I believe that they should go and get expert help, whether it be NALAG, whether it be counsellors or whatever, because until you go and do that and talk about it, and you're not going to get that release of it. I can't explain what I mean by release, but in talking about it, you seem to accept it, and you feel much better in yourself. But I do honestly believe people need to go and get expert help and to talk.
Thank you, Joan, for continuing to be such a strong advocate for suicide prevention and bereavement support services and allowing us to share your story again. Thank you all for watching. We hope that this video has provided you with some insights and resources into suicide prevention and bereavement support services. All of the resources mentioned in this video will be available on our website. Remember to take care of each other and yourself. Stay safe and know that help is always available.